Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the EDC Coffee Chat, Coffee with Colleen. And we are honored to have the city manager of Port Angeles join us this morning, Nathan West. He gave an excellent presentation at the Port Angeles Chamber State of the City meeting this week. And but because there was so many people with announcements, including myself, he didn't get as much time as I think he would have liked to have had. And he also mentioned he changed up some of the slides just a bit for us. So it's terrific that he's able to be here and talk to everyone. Also, if anybody has any questions, this will give you an opportunity to follow up with him. And with that, just a few housekeeping items. I'm going to put many of you on mute so we just don't pick up any background noise. And then we can, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat or certainly raise your hand and I'll go ahead and call on you. We like this to be interactive. So you don't need to wait till the very end. We try to keep this very informal, but with all of that, Nathan, if you'd like to take it away. And thanks.
Thank you, Colleen. I'm going to go ahead and try to share screens, and do feel free to slow me down, although there is a lot of content, so I'm going to be going through it fairly quick here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, good morning again, everyone. I'm so excited to be here this morning. I think there's a great deal to celebrate as we look at what's going on across the Olympic Peninsula and specifically in Port Angeles. And I'm really looking forward to sharing with you a number of the key things and projects that Port Angeles has been working on in 2021, as well as will continue to be working on in 2022. Specifically, I want to highlight some of the important elements of our strategic plan at the City of Port Angeles, look at some of the issues of critical importance that have been identified, some of our focus areas and outcomes at the city, look at some of those work plan highlights, both 2021 and 2022, and then really talk about some bigger community challenges that we have where we need to work together. And then finally, looking at some ways that we really need to stay engaged in 2022. So first, I want to talk about how we began with the strategic plan in Port Angeles. And ultimately, that began with a council retreat. It was difficult when you have so many issues as a city to focus on, that we worked hard to drill down and look at what those primary items are. Specifically, council ended up passing a resolution in support of that plan, and staff took the time to build a work plan with over 74 different projects that we're going to be working on to ensure that we are actually implementing that strategic plan. And I think it's important to share that the work plan itself doesn't include those everyday tasks that our police officers have, that our public works department team members have. These are special projects on top of the regular workload. So the strategic plan has 4 issues of critical importance that council has emphasized. These are what we want the City of Port Angeles to focus on: housing and homelessness, commercial district enhancement, capacity, high-performing relationships, and ultimately ensuring that we are recovering well from the pandemic. So when we drill down on housing and homelessness, the real takeaway goals were making sure that we've got concrete steps to increase housing units, to make sure that those units are both affordable and permanent, and that we're also providing appropriate services to our residents that are experiencing homelessness. So we want to look at some of those outcomes. And when you think about what occurred in 2021, we actually saw 53 new housing units, which compares to the 29 that we saw in 2020. While 53 may seem like a small number of housing units, It's actually a really big number for us at the city of Port Angeles. If you look back in history, it's actually a record number for our single family residential permits. But a challenge that remains there is that only 13 of those 53 units were under $200,000, which means we've got a significant affordability issue within the community that we need to continue to diligently work on. I think it's important to share, though, that council has been working diligently on land use policy. And so the document that you see to the side here is actually a one-page document of all the different housing-related policy incentives and tools that we've created to ensure that we're making an easy path for housing development in the community of Port Angeles. I think as we're looking at some of those services that we need to provide for those experiencing homelessness, we're thrilled to see the success of the Community Paramedicine Program. It had over 1,200 responses, 485 referrals, and 42% of the patients that were then referred to other services, and 92% actually completed their referral. The rediscovery program that is operated through our police department was one that was also very successful. Over 10,000 different total contacts, over 4,000 referrals, 57% of those referrals actually connected people to services for over 351 unique individuals. The Senior Center also contributed a great deal during the pandemic with over 1,500 takeout meals served to our community and 7,000 senior meals delivered. So looking at the commercial district enhancement issue of critical importance, we really wanted to make sure that we're looking at all of our commercial districts, not just the downtown. But a big part is making sure too that we are thinking about downtown walkability, cleanliness, safety, and vibrancy. And that's a really important issue for the city. There's a number of things that we're doing there, but also prioritizing multiple centers in the commercial corridor and looking at ways that we can change those to ensure that improvements to those corridors are actually moving forward. So one of the outcomes in this area is working on the downtown plan, and City of Port Angeles contracted with the Chamber of Commerce for a strategic plan effort. On this effort, we saw a really well involved public process that included over 700 different individual inputs through both surveys and workshops. And the plan was completed and presented on November 16th to City Council. It includes a great deal of indicators, performance outcomes, and what I really like is it has benchmarks and goals that ensure we're actually making forward progress. It's exciting to see too that the Chamber's actually already moved forward with a number of working committees that are now meeting regularly to actually start implementing some of the outcomes of that plan. Looking at outcomes, it's for the commercial districts, it's also important to recognize the city has an important role here, that we have a number of capital projects that we're working on that will make a big difference for those commercial corridors. A key element is ensuring we've got 24-hour restrooms being implemented, improvements to city pier railings, improvements to transportation at Highway 101 and the truck route, but also looking at ways that we can partner with others. And we did partner in 2021, beginning a relationship with the Clallam County Crew, formerly known as the Chain Gang, to help us clean up public right-of-ways and city properties with what formerly was known as the Chain Gang. Council also implemented a number of new land use policies and codes that help enable multiple commercial centers to succeed with different types of development. So building capacity at the city is another important issue of critical importance. And really it's a focus on improving those outcomes for our businesses, for our residents, and making sure that we have capacity to move forward the different projects that we have. I think it's important that we share that as part of being successful there with those outcomes, it's making sure the city has stable revenues and incomes. So specifically looking at some of those revenues that we saw in 2021, we actually saw sales tax grow by about 6.8% compared to 2020. We see property tax coming in about 2.4% higher than 2020. And lodging tax was actually a 95% increase compared to 2020. It was actually 2021 was the highest amount collected in a year on record. And you may remember we had a number of 7 years in a row where we saw record-setting lodging tax dollars coming in. Well, last year we actually got over the 1 million mark. And the numbers this year already in 2022 are already coming in 18.7% higher than 2021. So that's good news for lodging tax. It's good news for all the events and the diversity of uses that we apply those funds towards. Real estate excise tax is also a big change and improvement with 36% increase over 2020. So for the third issue of critical importance, it's also important to recognize we don't do this alone. And I think it's important to recognize the importance and the value that contracting with the EDC has brought to the table, looking at ways that we rely on others to help us. So the EDC actually brought into Port Angeles businesses only over 1.44 million in lifeboat grants. The EDC also conducted over 112 business retention and expansion efforts into Port Angeles businesses. And I think that's really important when we're looking at those economic outcomes and making sure that we're caring for and creating an environment that enables our businesses to succeed. Another important step there is making sure that we're ensuring those local businesses and contractors are able to succeed with local procurements. And we're so grateful to the EDC for the Procurement Technical Assistance Center and their PTAC work, making sure that we have a PTAC presence in our local community. So a final piece to the capacity issue is just recognizing that we have a backlog of capital facilities plan items. And right now we have over 186 projects valued at $123 million in our capital facilities plan. Many of these projects are ones that are overdue that we really need to catch up on. 97 million of those are transportation projects, and council's authorized a 2-year project manager position to really help us recover and catch up from the slowing that the pandemic actually created in the success there. So in 2020, we saw about 22 large capital projects completed. And in 2021, we saw 26 completed, and we expect even more in 2022. Additionally, we've switched one of the park positions to ensure that that's also covering project management to really help move some of those projects forward. So the fourth issue of critical importance is high performing relationships. So we care greatly at the city about ensuring that we have good, strong relationships with everybody in the community and making sure that we're building trust and cohesion among those relationships. So when you look at some of those outcomes that we saw, ultimately we demonstrated partnerships through memorandums of understanding, contracts, and other methods with over 74 different entities in 2021. And council and staff participated in over 25 boards and committees with other entities. So a few diverse examples of those partnerships included a key partnership with the Dream Playground Foundation. Seeing the success of Dream Playground Generation 2, we couldn't be more excited about the success of that project. And it's not one that we would have seen successful alone. We're also thrilled with the outpouring of support from the North Olympic Healthcare Network and their assistance with the Paramedicine Grant Program. And then just to illustrate diversity, we saw a great deal of good support from Clallam County on housing solutions and ways to move that forward, as well as United Way. And then also the sale of city property to North Olympic Land Trust to ensure that we're thinking about environmental importance as well, and seeing that we have further protection of the Ennis Creek corridor through that transaction. So looking at pandemic recovery, it's also important that we're ensuring our community is truly recovering. And so some of the steps that we've taken there is really working to make sure we're getting the federal funding that was provided to our community back out in the community. And a couple key examples there are the Peninsula Behavioral Health All View Motel purchase, where over $700,000 was committed by city and county for the success of that project. The Peninsula Housing Authority Shane Place housing development, where we contributed $250,000 for property purchase. And Habitat for Humanity has really stepped up to ensure we're providing protection to our housing stock, making sure that we have the ability to repair and maintain housing so that it doesn't fall apart and fall out of the equation relative to housing. The Blackball Ferry, we couldn't be happier to see Blackball up and operating again. $500,000 was contributed through the American Rescue Plan Act from the city, and we're so appreciative to see the county and the state really step up in that regard as well to ensure Blackball was successful in the long term. Childcare allocations were also critical, considering the impacts we saw during the pandemic, and we've so far contributed $106,000 to Boys and Girls Club and $98,000 to the Shore Metro Park District for the success of their Spark Squad program. So other important recovery actions from the pandemic, council approved over $250,000 in additional funds. You may remember in 2020, we had a substantial allocation for utility relief. 250 additional is going forward this year for the utility relief program for customers financially impacted by the pandemic. And also council approved and authorized temporary city staffing, which enabled us to get a number of key positions. Like I mentioned, the project management position that helps us move some of those projects forward. We've implemented some key public meeting technology for better hybrid meetings at the council level, as well as other staff level meetings. And then interest in ensuring that we're waiving accounts receivable interest and making sure that that is not a burden on our local ratepayers. In 2021, we also waived the parking business improvement area fees for a period of 6 months. And a key one, I think that's really important to this group, is we actually suspended the building code provisions that enabled COVID pause projects to actually succeed and continue to move forward under the code that they were designed in. We also developed a guide for some outdoor dining options for local businesses in the downtown. So looking at a few additional items, a really important one in 2021 was ensuring that we're taking care of the Olympic Discovery Trail, and council passed a resolution in August of last year. We were able to get a great contract, an on-call contract with 2 Grade Construction, who is consistently stepping up and out there helping us maintain that trail. And we're so appreciative to 2 Grade, but we're also very appreciative for the Peninsula Trails Coalition for their consistency in stepping up on helping out with trail maintenance. We've also made major headway in submitting permits for future trail needs. So an important legislative item is recognizing that our 911 communicators that work for the city's PENCOM unit are really being respected, and recognizing that many of them are out there on a daily basis saving lives. And this was something really important to City Council. In 2021, Council approved a proclamation in support of recognizing them as emergency responders. And we saw good support from the state legislature that ultimately resulted in Senate Bill 5555 being put forward. Senator Vandeweghe was a primary sponsor of that, and the bill successfully passed both House and Senate. And we're happy to say it was signed by the governor on March 31st. So one additional element that was done is looking at lodging tax policy. And this is something that has long been discussed by council, and really looking at recognizing we're hoping that events really grow and succeed. And we ultimately want to see those events be self-sustaining. So there was new lodging tax policy passed in 2021. It creates a cap of $10,000 per event per year, which is a big change from what we've seen before. We were seeing a growth trend among those events as far as the asks. And ultimately, we want to ensure that we're opening the door for new events as well. So ultimately, there's a phase out of funding after 5 years that's been implemented through that policy. And we're really wanting to make sure too that those events are really engaging the local community with arts, culture, and economic development opportunities. So those are some additional changes. But ultimately, we're again encouraging those events to be self-sufficient. So I want to get back to housing, and there will probably be at least 3 times where I talk about the importance of housing today. But again, we saw a great increase in permitting in 2021. I expect we're going to see even more increases in housing in 2022. But really making sure that we're changing the code to enable those changes. An example that you see in the picture there is the substantial reduction in lot size, where we've actually reduced lot size to about 3,500 square feet. And overall, whether you look at setbacks, whether you look at the allowable building footprint, there have been major changes done by council in code that enable private property to be further developed, well surpassing what was capable or what we were able to do in the past in this jurisdiction. We do anticipate a second phase in 2022 of municipal code updates relative to land use areas as well as signage. And then also we've worked hard to get a housing coordinator position. We did have someone accept that position last week, so we're looking forward to having that person on board in the very near future. Climate resiliency is a top priority for the city as well. And we've done a complete inventory of greenhouse gas emissions of government and community sectors. That's still underway in so many different areas. But we've worked hard to develop a draft climate resiliency plan. We anticipate in the next couple of months, actually in May, there will be a work session with council to actually present and provide that plan. We've worked well to leverage a volunteer group, and we're so appreciative of all the volunteers who have helped up to step up and make sure that our public engagement process there is successful. But we also really appreciate the great regional approach, and the North Olympic Development Council has stepped up to help us ensure there's a regional approach taking place relative to climate resiliency. So a number of steps were undertaken in 2021 and 2022 to enhance the service we provide relative to permitting. And so a number of things that we've done, we've enhanced some of the ways that you can do inspections. We now offer both hybrid we now offer both virtual or in-person inspections, which I think has been really flexible for the building community, as they may have a different preference. And some of those virtual ones are a lot more efficient. But there's lots of ways to ensure we're also troubleshooting some of the issues that come up among different departments at the city. And we've established a development review team between Public Works, IT, and our Community and Economic Development Department to really help with the community there. And ultimately, we're also working hard to coordinate every element of the city, recognizing we have other departments involved too, like the fire department. So in the police department, one of the things I want to highlight is just we have a lot of recruitment that takes place within the police department. In last year, we had to replace over 7 different officers. And I think it's important to share that as we replace officers, it takes time to get officers up to speed. It truly takes about 2 years before an officer is on the ground, ready to go and fully trained, like the rest of our law enforcement officers. So it's a big investment, and it's important that we focus really well on the way we recruit for our police department. It's also important that we're focusing on replacing the vacant positions in Peninsula Communications, which again are 911 operators. Right now, it's a very difficult job, and we've created a number of incentives to ensure that we're getting hires in that area. And if you know anybody who's interested for those positions, we'd love to have more applicants as 911 communicators. So our finance department, I think it's safe to say the city is still in a very good position relative to fiscal responsibility, and we continue to see the finance department receive awards on the work that they do for their annual budget process, as well as their annual budgeting reporting. I think it's important to share a big part of the finance department is recognizing that they operate the utility payment arena. And so a couple of the things and steps that we have taken this year are discontinuing shutoff of utilities for non-payment. Ultimately, the interest waivers have been continued all the way through December 31st, 2022. And ultimately, as long as someone's willing to provide a payment plan, you won't see a disconnect. And we're going to be working diligently with those customers with no less than 6 different reminders before we make any effort to disconnect anyone's power. So those are some big steps. And ultimately, there was also a temporary change made to the municipal code to enable more successful reconnection if someone were to lose their connection at the end of the day. So far this year, there have been no disconnects due to non-payment. So our fire department works really hard, and if you look comparatively at other jurisdictions, they actually respond to far more calls than any normal jurisdiction of our size, over 5,600 calls. And it's important to share that those are medical service calls as well as fire calls. And they're doing a lot of different things in the fire department, but mostly I want to highlight the Paramedicine Program. That's a program that's been newly created, but ultimately, again, because we saw the North Olympic Healthcare Network step up, we've seen 3 years of good funding through a grant that they were able to provide. And ultimately, we now have 3 employees dedicated to that paramedicine program, and we're really excited about that. The total outside revenue we see for that program is over $380,000 annually. So looking at our legal department, oftentimes it's difficult to see what the legal department actually does because it's really more of an internal service, but it is really meaningful to our community, the work that they do. And one of the primary projects is harbor cleanup, recognizing that Port Angeles cares greatly about ensuring we ultimately have a very clean harbor at the end of the day. And the legal department's been working hard to ensure we're seeing progress from Department of Ecology on that harbor cleanup. Additionally, code enforcement is one where the legal department plays a role in the successful implementation of the recently adopted code changes. They worked really hard in 2021 to help with the authoring of that code, getting it before council, and ultimately seeing the successful adoption. And I think you'll see a number of examples in 2022 where that new code enforcement code's really been successful. Probably some examples we could talk about today. And then they've worked diligently on our solid waste issue, ensuring that we're protecting the city's ratepayers from large increases, another big deal and a time-consuming effort for our legal department. So our Parks and Recreation Department, I want to highlight a key project as the Dream Playground. Again, without partnership, that wouldn't have been successful, but it really was a key success in 2021. And I think it's just something to celebrate. As many of you probably attended and participated in that build. It was a fun activity. And I've shared before, it was probably one of the best dates I had in 2021 with my wife, where we actually got to go there and help with that build. Really amazing activity where we saw the community come together for that success. Upcoming projects, we've long heard about the need for both residents and visitors to have accessibility to restrooms. And we have a new plan for 24-hour restrooms. We expect to see those implemented this year. We actually saw the pump track effort start this week in Erickson Park, and we're really appreciative to Lincoln Park BMX, who has helped move that project forward. But I'll talk later about some of those volunteer efforts. And then volunteer field, we were successful in getting a new grant with some big private matches to ensure we're able to implement turf and volunteer field. And then working with the school district on some innovative ways to ensure that we're not using a lot of staff time out there painting lines on fields with something called a turf tank that actually is a bit of an automated line painting mechanism to get the lines on our play fields. So our public works team right now, their predominant focus is a solid waste division transition. And this is a big deal. We actually took the smallest division in our public works department, and we're growing it into the largest division in our public works department. But ultimately, what matters to the city is that everybody in Clallam County and the city of Port Angeles have reasonable rates, and that we're seeing solid waste go to the right places. There's a lot more work to do there, and we appreciate everyone's patience on that effort. but we're working diligently to make sure it's completely successful. Public Works helped out with major improvements for pedestrian and multimodal safety on the Lincoln Street corridor. You may have seen the traffic light go in last week. And then also developing an overall ADA transition plan that got adopted in December of last year, making sure we're taking care of some of those important accessibility issues and challenges that we have in town. Great example is the implementation we're seeing there on Francis Street that ensures we're ultimately seeing connectivity from the Olympic Discovery Trail to our recreational corridor over at Erickson Park. And then finally, looking at the wastewater comprehensive plan and really thinking through making sure that we have the capacity to take care of new developments. It's really going in and evaluating where we have wastewater needs to make sure the wastewater services are going to be available at the time that we see new development come throughout the city of Port Angeles. So now I want to shift to some important challenges that I see coming for our community. And I think it's so important that to get through these challenges, the city can't do it alone. We're going to need to work together as a community. When you think about some of what we're seeing across the state, there's a high importance on fish barrier removal. The city of Port Angeles very much wants to see recovery of our creek corridors, making sure that we're treating those corridors well and we're doing the right thing for the environment within those corridors. Simultaneously, though, the mechanisms that WashDOT uses to actually implement couldn't be more important. And I think it's a good comparison to recognize that there will be major traffic impacts to our community when we see the Ennis Creek, Lees Creek, and Tumwater Creek projects move forward with buried bridges. We will see lane closures there. And I think it's comparable back to 2009 when we actually saw the reconstruction of the Hood Canal Bridge. The community came together because we knew there were going to be major impacts and a lack of accessibility to our community. So it's really important that we think about some of those things ahead of time. If you go back to 2009, we actually saw the community really come together in two ways. One, working on the American Institute of Architects program, Sustainable Design Assessment Team grant. Ultimately, that lives forward today with a number of implementation ideas that came out of that plan. We also saw a program called Community at Work Painting the Downtown, where we saw over 43 different property owners in the downtown come forward and paint downtown buildings. Really big deal, but I think it's important that we tap into that historic attitude of together we can. And I think that it's important we are going to have to do that in some of these situations. So a challenge that all of us are facing right now is hiring. And the city of Port Angeles currently has 26 vacancies. And we too have very much struggled with hiring right now. I think it's important to recognize housing has oftentimes played a role there. And we're recognizing that for all employers in the community, that too has been an impact. So I think it's important that we recognize and think about what's coming down the line in housing and how are we further supporting the housing needs of the community. I think one of the things I want to do is just say thank you to the investments that we're seeing, to those private sector developments that are out there. Annie and Shores has been working with the city for quite some time. Their latest rendition actually has over 200 units that they're planning to move forward in our downtown. That's going to be a big deal for our housing need. Additionally, we've seen Dungeness Valley Homes over off of Melody Lane in Port Angeles, planning to develop 27 multifamily units. Milwaukee Trail Estates, that's a new development moving forward at 14th and Milwaukee with over 37 units. And then Sage Homes has really stepped up with their phase one, getting building permits and moving forward with over 41 units in phase one with a phase 2 and 3 that has the potential for over 180 additional units. It's so important to recognize too that every year we continue to see Habitat for Humanity, Peninsula Behavioral Health, Peninsula Housing Authority work on ongoing housing investments. And were it not for them, we wouldn't be seeing the numbers and counts of units that we receive for affordable housing. So we're so appreciative of them for that. I think it's important to acknowledge too, last year, a key conversation began relative to housing solutions, and United Way really stepped up to start up that conversation, making sure that all the parties were coming together to have some key discussions about housing solutions. So another major challenge that we're seeing continues to be childcare. And it couldn't be more important that we are really thinking through and taking care of our younger generations, because ultimately it has an impact on the future of our community. We know that how we treat and respect youth today in every way we can, it's going to make a difference in the long term relative to the population of this community. And so I want to say thank you to the Boys and Girls Club for really stepping up with their new facility, for the Shore Aquatic Center Spark Squad effort, for the YMCA, for Prevention Works, who's really out there trying to drive good education relative to childcare needs, and the many private sector childcare businesses who have taken the time to navigate the regulations and find ways to really start up and see the success of their own businesses caring for our local youth and children. So staying engaged in 2022, there's a number of key projects that the city is going to be working on. Some of them are not city projects, but this is one that is a city project that we're really excited about. This is one we actually discussed last night in council. The city of Port Angeles received what's called a Happy Grant, and it is something that I think will go a long way to helping out with the housing challenges in the community. Ultimately, this grant's going to allow for us to have pre-approved prototypes and designs for accessory dwelling units as well as duplexes. We'll actually be the first in the state to be doing this for duplexes and doing designs for infill lots. We've seen it done in other jurisdictions for larger lots, for county lots and things like that, but we'll be the first to see it, to be doing it on these smaller infill lots. Another key element of this grant is improving the ease of land divisions. And now that we have changed the minimum lot size to 3,500 square feet, we have the ability to see divisions of those 7,000 square foot traditional lots that we've long had in this community. It's a big deal for housing, and ultimately it will make our land base that much more developable. Updating permitting and utility fees to incentivize housing units is a key element of this grant as well. Really looking at the different fees we have and making sure that we're incentivizing multifamily options, that we're finding ways to help those private developers be successful in their application. And there will be a public workshop up and coming for further discussion on this item. So another one that's actually coming up next week that I think is important to our community is a discussion on short-term rentals. And if you look back at the history on short-term rentals, prior to 2009, we really didn't have anything that spoke to short-term rentals. We had a bed and breakfast conditional use permit that was done administratively that required living within that residence before you provided any type of short-term occupancy. In 2009, the city did an interpretation that recognized that vacation rentals were similar to high density and medium density housing, and therefore those were then allowed in the high density and medium density zones. And ultimately in 2017, council stepped up and made some code changes, adding short-term rentals as a definition and added them as permitted uses in all of our commercial zones, with the exception of commercial office where they're conditionally permitted, and our residential high density and residential medium zones. So they are permitted in all of those zones as of today. I think there is a lot of community interest in this issue, and we saw that in a recent survey that was done by Madrona Law Group, who's been working on our municipal code updates. We saw over 730 responses to that survey. And these are just some of the stats that we saw, but 31% felt they should be allowed without restriction. 55% thought they should be allowed, but with certain regulations in place. 6% were neutral and 7% felt they should not be allowed. I think it's valuable to take a look at that survey, and I'll try to get Colleen a link for that survey, but there were a lot of important public comments provided in written form within that survey that just share this is a really important community issue, and there's a lot of diversity in the opinions that are out there. So on April 26th, City Council, and this is next Tuesday from 5 to 7, City Council will be taking the opportunity to discuss this among themselves, really looking at a way. One, they'll receive a presentation from the Madrona Law Group, who will provide a variety of examples from throughout the state of how different ways short-term rentals have been implemented in communities. And ultimately, council will hopefully weigh in on scope of work and what that process looks like moving forward. But an essential piece of that project is ensuring that there's a public process, making sure that we're engaging the community. So for the work session, there is not a public comment period. I still would encourage everybody to attend and listen. And there will be multiple opportunities in the future for good public engagement and comment. So in 2022, we're really excited to see the pump track moving forward. As I mentioned, it started earlier this week. And again, Lincoln Park BMX really stepped up to help make that happen. There's going to be volunteer opportunities, probably similar to the Dream Playground. And we really want everybody to step up, volunteer, and be a part of that, the success of that project. I think it's so important to recognize how hard the work has been for the Port Angeles Waterfront Center throughout the pandemic, but recognize how close they are. And it's so important that we celebrate all the work that's going to be going into the overall campus area of the Waterfront Center. For Field Hall, we want to see the building open. I know Brooke mentioned earlier in this meeting, we're expecting an August restart of that project. But I think it's important to encourage the community to follow through on that project, follow through with the support, and making sure we're continuing to make a commitment to see the success of Field Hall, and then follow through beyond that by making sure that we're supporting the Faro Marine Life Center and NOAA effort on the new Marine Discovery Center. That's going to be a really exciting new facility on that campus. And then finally, also the Lower Elwha Clallam Tribe's Longhouse cultural facility on that same campus. We're really excited about that important downtown development, and we need the community's support to ensure that ultimately it is successful. So finally, in staying engaged, I want to highlight some important things coming up in the very near future. Specifically this weekend at City Pier, we have a great event. I know Colleen mentioned she was going to be there this weekend, but from 11 to 1, we actually have an Earth Day event at City Pier. We're really excited about that event. There's also a number of beach cleanups, including one on Eddie's Hook from 1:30 to 5. And then finally, there on May 7th, we have a Chamber of Commerce sponsored downtown cleanup, which is a really important event. They held one of those last year. It made a really big difference to our downtown area. So finally, I want to emphasize that everyone in our community has a role in our success. And really now is the time to make sure that we're picking up where we left off 2 years ago when the pandemic began. Let's take the time to build on the momentum that was going on back then. Let's take the time to continue that excitement about all the different projects we have going on in the community. And then finally, let's make sure we're seeing forward movement of the Port Angeles community. And I just want to share that I'm so grateful to all of you, because ultimately it's all of you who make the community be successful at the end of the day. And we're just so appreciative at the city of all that you do to contribute to our community's success. So thank you.
Well, terrific. Thank you, Nathan. I saw we did have several questions in the chat. So Lori Mittman, do you want to ask your question first?
Sure. I just hadn't heard of the Paramedicine Program. I just wondered how that was different from the normal EMS response.
So the Paramedicine Program is different in that we have 3 staff members, and actually I believe 1 vacancy there right now among those 3, but ultimately they go out in the field and they find people in need and they actually deliver services directly to them. Whether that is administration of COVID vaccines, whether it's administration of other medications that they may need, we're going out and actually meeting people on the ground And ultimately what that does is it makes a huge difference relative to emergency room visits. So that those individuals don't end up in the emergency room, because we have people going out in the community, finding people in need and taking care of them.
Great, thanks, Nathan. I see Angela had two questions, and one of hers was the same as mine. So Angela, do you want to ask?
Sure. Sure. Just checking on, the first thing was the public restrooms, and if there's going to be some type of lock for people that have those accessible. If it's a 24-hour thing, it makes me worried about people's safety.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and I think it's important. We're using a well-tested restroom option, which is known as the Portland Loo. You can Google it and learn more about it, but ultimately they will be 3 24-hour restrooms. And I do believe they have ability to lock from the inside, but they're also made in a way that's easy to maintain, easy to clean, and ultimately proven in urban jurisdictions throughout this country.
I'll look that up. And then, of course, the big question for us manufacturers is just how many of the Airbnbs or short-term rentals are we looking at in the city of Port Angeles? Because we are looking at an increase of in the summer of hiring people, and I just wanted to know the housing issue, which is something that I'm going to have to address with people that we may bring in from the outside. Thank you.
Yeah, so I believe right now we're seeing about 259 in the community. I think that there's ways we can drill down on that number and just verify its accuracy. We previously subscribed to a service that actually gave us that number, but this is a number that our interim director of community and economic development just provided to me.
259?
Correct.
Okay. I've heard 900 in the county total. And so imagine if some portion of those, large portion of those, were suddenly available as long-term rentals, how that would really improve the housing situation and the workforce capacity in our county. So with that, I see Rick Dickinson has a question from Center of Inclusive Entrepreneurship. Rick?
Thanks. Thank you, Colleen. And thanks, Nathan, for this very detailed presentation. Good stuff. I raised my hand because kind of a follow-on to the short-term rental question is, and I'm wondering, like, what percentage, if any, of the lodging tax is coming from short-term rental properties? And then, is this directly equivalent to our housing shortage? And then wondering also about, so are we having some competing incentives, I guess, essentially? Like, we love making money off the lodging tax, but is it also actually causing or contributing to the housing shortage?
So Rick, I think those are great questions. I don't have a specific percentage for you of lodging tax income coming from short-term rentals, but I can tell you, we do expect, and ultimately the state expects, that short-term rentals are paying lodging tax. And we do receive quite a bit of revenue from short-term rentals on lodging tax. We don't typically receive the breakdown. I can certainly check and see if we can ask for the breakdown of what percentage is short-term versus hotels. I don't have that number, but I do think it's a pretty good number. As far as the impact of short-term rentals, I think there's an interesting community debate there, and we have a lot of different opinions. I think when you look at the housing impact, we are seeing a lot of residential units actually being converted to short-term rental, and that impacts our renting stock for those that need places to rent. At the same time, we know that some individuals are actually utilizing short-term rentals to complement their income in ways where they have extremely low income, and they're basically using it to survive, whether they actually step out of their house and rent it out for a while to make some income to be able to pay their own mortgage. that's, one of the things that we've heard about that people are actually doing. I'll say too, another thing that sometimes we're seeing businesses do is actually, when you cannot find any housing units, short-term rentals are the go-to place to get somebody here on the ground for them to take some time and find a place. But I do think there is impact to our residential unit stock, and I think that's the importance of why council is hoping to discuss that.
I see Eric Marks has a follow-up question. Eric, would you like to ask your question? If not, Eric, I will go ahead and ask it for you. Follow up to Rick's question: to what extent is the city allowed to create / impose a tax on short-term rental activity?
So as far as imposing a new tax, I don't know that there has been discussion of imposing a new tax. I mean, that's something that I haven't specifically seen, but already you have a 4% lodging tax that is applied to those short-term rentals. So Eric, I don't know if that answers your question, but if you're aware of other legislation out there, there may be other ways to tax short-term rentals, but specifically, I haven't seen that done.
Lindsay, one of the city council people for the city of PA, do you want to share anything regarding that? I know you've been doing a lot of research and you've been putting some great information in the chat here.
Sorry, I was just ghosting in the chat there. Yeah, I think people should come to the presentation and the discussion next week on Tuesday from 5 to 7 to learn more about short-term rentals. I think that's just going to be the start of kind of our official conversation about it. I'm definitely concerned about how they impact housing stock and housing availability, but there are also other concerns that people have brought forward about short-term rentals. And then, Eric's questions about the scope of the city's authority to regulate are great questions. That presentation on Tuesday, Nathan can correct me if I'm mistaken, is going to be by Madrona Law Group, who are attorneys who we've hired to work on our code update. So it should address a number of the questions that have come up here, and I hope people choose to attend. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. Micah has a question, then we'll go to Kay, and then I've got one comment. Go ahead, Micah.
Yeah, I'm curious if we know like what percentage of short-term rentals are owned by like out of area investors versus people who live in the region. I bought a house during these past couple of years and we got outbid 3 times with cash by people who bought the house and the furnishing within and just turned around and flipped it into a short-term rental. And I wonder how much that occurred with the low credit rate we had.
So I don't have statistics on how many short-term rentals are from outside the community versus inside the community. Again, there is a specific software that you can subscribe to that might drill down, but I'm doubtful they're going to have meaningful drill down on that metric. I will share that I did speak with the real estate group and multiple realtors stood up. This was a few weeks back and said that predominantly the purchasers in our community right now of housing are coming from outside the community, and outside the community individuals are winning the bidding wars relative to housing in the community.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I know in Forks, they did some analysis, and in 2 years, 151 homes within, I believe it was within the Forks city limits, were purchased for short-term rentals from people that lived outside of the county. So, I mean, that's just Forks. So it's pretty significant. Kay?
Thank you. Can you expand on the housing coordinator position duties, please?
Yes. So in 2019, the city of Port Angeles made a big investment in a housing needs assessment. That needs assessment indicated we needed over 2,900 housing units by the year 2030. And that's a big number, and we're not on pace to get there. So ultimately, we have been building a toolbox of different incentives as well as mechanisms such as a multifamily tax exemption, the support for infrastructure on some of those key projects through the equivalent of House Bill 1590, which the county recently passed. But ultimately, within that report, there's a number of implementation items, and the housing coordinator's responsibility will ensure that we're seeing those implemented. A good example is the Happy Grant that I mentioned. They will be responsible for moving forward some of those design elements, like the accessory dwelling unit designs, like the duplex designs, basically laying the groundwork to make it easier for housing unit development.
Thank you.
So one thing that I've been hearing about across the state is the unintended consequences that occur when, and this is primarily like in the King County area, but what happens if one jurisdiction creates some incentives or regulations regarding housing and another one that is right next to it does not. It really lowers the value of homes and in the real estate in one area and increases it in another. And so that patchwork quilt kind of regulatory environment is something I hope we don't see here, that we have some coordination amongst the different four municipalities from our county, and ideally Jefferson and Port Townsend, so that there's kind of we don't end up with the unintended consequences where, you know, people, okay, if you don't have vacation rentals here, if you just, you know, go across the street or 2 blocks down, now you have it there, and those values skyrocket, that kind of thing. So I hope we see some coordination. And so that long-term housing committee that the county has started, I think can be pretty valuable so that we work together as a larger community. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I see that Debbie has a question. Debbie?
Actually, I had 2 questions. Nathan, are the incentives going to be available for county projects as well as city projects for housing?
So I think that ties into what Colleen just shared. And I think a really important element to talk about is the county has actually created and formalized a housing solutions committee that has representatives from the county, from the city of Sequim, the city of Forks, and the city of Port Angeles, all at the table. And I think that committee will go a long way to mitigate what Colleen mentioned, but it also is an opportunity for us to share with each other what we're working on, what we're doing. And I think we've already seen some good ability to communicate what we're doing and see follow through among jurisdictions to move in similar directions. And I think that's some good news. And I do know that I've had multiple conversations with Randy Johnson at the county about working together to make sure that some of these things are available in the county area.
Also, the other question I had, and I asked this of Randy at the PABA meeting about residential assisted living units. We have an increased senior population that is needing assisted living, and some of them live in like 5-bedroom houses. They're living by themselves. Is there a provision that they could actually turn that into something that they could share their home with?
So home sharing has been discussed. I think one that I would emphasize is the city's American Rescue Plan allocation to Habitat for Humanity. It's really about aging in place and again, protecting that housing stock for those that are aging in place. It's a program I'm really excited about because as we see individuals that are aging in their homes, it steps out in the community and helps them out, whether it's a re-roof or whether it's an ADA ramp. We've got resources dedicated to seeing success there for those aging in place.
Thank you.
So a couple questions in the chat about the meeting on short-term housing. It looks like that's a topic a lot of people are interested in. So is that Tuesday at 6 p.m.? And I don't know if anybody could put a link into the chat for it. I was just searching and couldn't find that. Oh, look at that. Oh, no, that's the Lindsay has the short-term rental numbers there for us.
So Colleen, I can
yes.
speak to that real quick. So on Tuesday, April 26th, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., there's a council work session. And so it's not your traditional regular meeting. There's not a public comment opportunity, but it will be a valuable listening opportunity. One, to hear the presentation from Madrona Law Group on what's taking place in other communities and jurisdictions. And secondly, to hear the council discussion on it in the second half of that work session. We will have multiple public meetings in the future. I don't have a link yet for that meeting because it hasn't been noticed yet, and probably will not be noticed until tomorrow, or probably not be noticed until later this afternoon or tomorrow. But it is, the meeting is scheduled 5 to 7, the 26th.
Great. Well, I will put that in our newsletter that we'll try to get out this Friday or Monday, but prior to Tuesdays for everyone. And with that, I see it's 9:03, so we've gone over just a bit. And thank you so much for joining us, Nathan, and everyone else. Great questions and terrific presentation, very detailed. We really appreciate your time. So thanks.
Thank you all.
Colleen, can you